I never thought the day would come when I'd stand on the porch of my own farmhouse, watching strangers unload their suitcases onto my front lawn, while my daughter-in-law, my own son's wife, stood beside them, arms folded, eyes cold as winter. "It's theirs now," she said, her voice slicing through the humid July air. "You're not welcome here anymore." The words hit me harder than any storm that ever battered these fields. For 40 years, I'd poured my sweat and soul into this land, building a home for my family, dreaming of grandchildren running through the orchards. Now I was being exiled by the very people I'd once welcomed with open arms. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, or if you know the pain of losing everything you built, please take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share your story in the comments. Your support means more than you know, and you might help someone else who's going through the same heartbreak. The shock was so sharp, I couldn't even speak. My son David stood behind her, silent, his face turned away, refusing to meet my eyes. I searched for some sign of regret, some flicker of the boy I'd raised, but all I saw was shame and fear. The strangers, her parents, her brother, even a cousin I'd never met, moved through my house as if they owned it, opening cabinets, peering into rooms, laughing at private jokes. My hands shook as I gripped the porch railing, the wood rough beneath my fingers, grounding me in a reality I could barely process. "Don't make a scene, Dad," David muttered, finally glancing at me. "It's just for a while. They need a place to stay." Just for a while, as if that made it any less of a betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched as my daughter-in-law, Jessica, handed her father the keys I'd given her for emergencies. "You're the man of our house now," she said, smiling. The humiliation burned hotter than the summer sun. I stumbled back to my truck, my mind spinning. How had it come to this? Only last Thanksgiving, Jessica had hugged me, called me Dad, thanked me for the pumpkin pie. Now, she was giving away my life's work like it was a party favor. I drove away, the farmhouse shrinking in my rearview mirror, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. I didn't know where to go. My entire world was that house, those fields. The memories of my late wife, the laughter of my children echoing through the halls. Now it all belonged to strangers. The next morning, I returned hoping it had all been a nightmare, but the driveway was packed with unfamiliar cars, and the sound of Jessica's family's voices drifted through the open windows. I knocked on the door, my hands trembling. Jessica's mother answered, her smile polite but empty. "Oh, you again," she said, as if I were a door-to-door salesman. "We're just getting settled. Jessica said you'd be by to pick up your things." My things. As if I were a tenant, not the owner. I pushed past her, desperate to find David, but he was nowhere in sight. Instead, I found Jessica in the kitchen, pouring coffee for her father. She didn't even look up. "You need to leave, Tom. This isn't your home anymore." My voice finally broke free, raw and desperate. "You can't do this. This is my house, my land. I built this place with my own hands." She set the coffee pot down, her eyes hard as stone. "You signed the papers, remember? You put the house in David's name last year. For tax reasons, you said. Well, now it's his, and he says we can stay as long as we want." The room spun. I remembered the day I'd signed those papers, trusting my son, never imagining he'd let this happen. I'd wanted to make things easier for him, to keep the farm in the family. Instead, I'd handed over the keys to my own destruction. Jessica's father appeared in the doorway, grinning. "We'll take good care of it, old man. Maybe even fix up that barn you never got around to." The insult stung, but what hurt more was the way Jessica smiled at him, proud of her victory. I turned and fled, my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. Outside, the sun was rising over the fields, painting the sky gold and pink, but all I saw was the shadow of betrayal stretching across the land. I spent the next week in a cheap motel on the edge of town, living out of a suitcase, my phone buzzing with messages from friends and neighbors who'd heard rumors but didn't know the truth. I ignored them all, too ashamed to explain how I'd lost everything. Each night, I replayed the scene in my mind, searching for some way to undo it, some loophole, some forgotten clause that would let me reclaim my home. But the law was clear. The house was in David's name. Legally, I was nothing. On the 7th day, I drove back to the farmhouse, determined to confront my son. I found him in the barn, fixing a broken fence post, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red. "Why, David?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer at first, just kept hammering, the sound echoing through the empty barn. Finally, he looked up, guilt etched deep into his face. Jessica said it was the only way. Her family lost their house. They had nowhere to go. She said if I didn't help, she'd take the kids and leave. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My own son, blackmailed by his wife, sacrificing his father for the sake of peace. I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was a crushing sadness. "You could have come to me," I said. "We could have found another way." He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know what else to do." I left him there, broken and alone, the weight of his choices pressing down on both of us. But as I drove away, something inside me hardened. I'd spent my whole life putting others first, sacrificing for my family, believing that love meant giving until there was nothing left. But now I realized there was a line that should never be crossed. Betrayal demands justice. And I was done being a victim. The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose, a cold, clear resolve I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let Jessica and her family steal my life's work without a fight. I started by driving to the county records office, my hands shaking as I handed over the paperwork. The clerk, a woman about my age, scanned the documents and looked up at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "You really put everything in your son's name?" she asked quietly. I nodded, shame burning in my chest. "I trusted him," I said. She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "You're not the first. But you might be the first to do something about it." I left the office with a copy of the deed and a list of local attorneys. I spent the afternoon making calls, my voice growing steadier with each conversation. Most lawyers told me the same thing. The law was on David's side. But one, a sharp-tongued woman named Ms. Carter, listened to my story in silence, then said, "Meet me tomorrow. Bring everything you have. There's always a way, Mr. Thompson, especially when people get greedy." Her confidence was a lifeline, and I clung to it as I drove back to the motel, hope flickering in my chest for the first time since Jessica's coup. That night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, replaying every moment of the past year. I remembered Jessica's sudden interest in the farm's finances, her insistence that we modernize the paperwork, her constant talk of protecting assets. I'd thought she was looking out for the family. Now I saw the truth. This, she'd been plotting this for months, maybe years. The realization made my blood run cold. I wondered how many other families she'd destroyed before mine. The next day I met Ms. Carter in her cramped office above a bakery. She listened as I laid out the whole sordid tale, her eyes sharp and unblinking. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. You may have signed the house over, but if you were coerced or if there was fraud, we might have a case. And if Jessica's family is living there without a lease, that's trespassing. The word sent a jolt through me. Trespassing. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of justice on the horizon. Ms. Carter moved fast. Within days, she'd filed an injunction, freezing any attempt to sell or transfer the property. She sent a formal notice to Jessica and her family, demanding they vacate the premises. The response was immediate and vicious. Jessica called me, her voice dripping with venom. You think you can scare us? My father knows people in this town. You're finished, old man. I hung up, my hands shaking, but I refused to back down. I'd spent too many years letting others walk all over me. Not anymore. Word spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors who'd once waved from their porches now watched me with wary eyes, unsure which side to take. Some sent messages of support, others whispered behind my back. But the worst was the silence from David. Days passed with no word from my son. I wondered if he was trapped, or if he'd chosen his wife's family over his own blood for good. Then one evening, as I sat in the motel lobby nursing a cup of bitter coffee, David appeared. He looked 10 years older, his face drawn and haunted. Dad, I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. Jessica's furious. Her family's threatening to sue you for harassment. They say you're trying to ruin their lives. I stared at him, anger and heartbreak warring inside me. They ruined mine first, I said quietly. You let them. He flinched, but didn't argue. I don't know what to do. Oh, he whispered. I'm losing my family. I shook my head, the pain almost too much to bear. You lost your family the moment you let them take my house. The legal battle escalated quickly. Jessica's father hired a high-priced attorney from the city, who sent threatening letters and tried to intimidate Ms. Carter. But she was relentless, digging through every document, every email, every text message. She found evidence that Jessica had pressured David to force me out, that her family had moved in before any agreement was made. She uncovered a trail of manipulation and deceit that painted a damning picture. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, Ms. Carter at my side. Jessica and her family sat across the aisle, their faces twisted with anger and contempt. David sat alone, eyes fixed on the floor. The judge listened as Ms. Carter laid out the facts, her voice calm and precise. She presented the evidence of coercion, the timeline of events, the blatant trespassing. Jessica's attorney blustered and threatened, but the truth was undeniable. When the judge finally spoke, his words were like thunder. This court finds that the transfer of property was made under duress and without full understanding of the consequences. The farmhouse and all associated land are to be returned to Mr. Thompson immediately. Jessica and her family are ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Jessica screaming, her father cursing, her mother sobbing, but I just sat there, numb with relief, tears streaming down my face. As I left the courthouse, neighbors who'd once doubted me now offered handshakes and hugs. "You did the right thing, Tom," one old friend said. "You stood up for yourself, for all of us." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight begin to lift from my shoulders. But the story wasn't over. Jessica's family didn't leave quietly. They trashed the house, smashing windows, tearing up floorboards, leaving behind a trail of destruction. When I returned, the farmhouse was almost unrecognizable. My wife's favorite china shattered, family photos ripped from the walls, the garden trampled. I stood in the wreckage, grief and rage warring inside me. But beneath it all, a new strength was growing. They could destroy my possessions, but they couldn't take my dignity. They couldn't erase my history. I spent the next days cleaning, repairing, rebuilding. Friends and neighbors showed up with tools and casseroles, helping me restore what had been lost. Each nail I hammered, each window I replaced, was an act of defiance, a promise to myself that I would never let anyone take advantage of me again. The farmhouse was battered, but I was unbroken. As I swept up the last shards of glass from the kitchen floor, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. The community's support was overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in decades came by, some with paint cans, others with stories of their own betrayals. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been used, manipulated, or cast aside by family. My story had become a rallying cry, a warning, and a source of hope. But Jessica wasn't finished. 2 days after the court order, I received a letter from her attorney threatening to appeal the decision and demanding compensation for emotional distress. The audacity was staggering. She'd stolen my home, destroyed my property, and now she wanted me to pay her for the pain of being caught. I laughed for the first time in weeks, a bitter, incredulous sound. Ms. Carter assured me it was a desperate move, a last-ditch effort to regain control. "She's lost, Tom," she said. "People like her can't stand to lose. But you've already won." Still, the threats kept coming. Jessica's father showed up at the edge of my property one evening, shouting obscenities and promising revenge. I called the sheriff, who escorted him off the land and warned him not to return. The message was clear. I wasn't alone anymore. The law, the town, and my own resolve were on my side. David, meanwhile, was a ghost. He called once, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry, Dad. I never wanted any of this." I listened in silence, the old ache in my chest flaring up. "You made your choice, son," I said quietly. "Now you have to live with it." He started to cry, but I didn't comfort him. I couldn't. Some wounds run too deep for easy forgiveness. As the weeks passed, I poured myself into restoring the farmhouse. Each day brought new challenges, broken pipes, ruined furniture, vandalized fields, but also new victories. I found my wife's wedding ring in the garden, glinting in the dirt where it had been tossed. I hung our family photos back on the walls, each one a testament to the life I'd built and the love I refused to let go. The farmhouse began to feel like home again, not just a monument to loss, but a symbol of resilience. One afternoon, as I was repairing the barn roof, a car pulled up the drive. I tensed, expecting another confrontation, but instead a young woman stepped out. Jessica's cousin, the one who'd laughed at me on that first terrible day. She approached slowly, her eyes downcast. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what Jessica was planning. I just went along with it because Well, because I was scared of her. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry for what we did to your home. Her apology was unexpected, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. But then I saw the fear and regret in her eyes, and I realized that not everyone in Jessica's family were beyond redemption. Thank you, I said simply. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. If you ever need help with the house or the farm, I'd like to make it right. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. Maybe, I thought, some good could come from all this pain. The final blow came a week later. Jessica and her family were evicted from their own rental home. Apparently they'd tried the same scheme with another relative, and word had spread. No one in town would rent to them, and they were forced to leave, their reputation in ruins. David called one last time, begging for help. Dad, we have nowhere to go, Mo. The kids are scared. Jessica's lost it. Please, just let us stay for a while. I closed my eyes, the weight of his plea pressing down on me. But I remembered the coldness in Jessica's eyes, the laughter of her family as they took over my home, the destruction they'd left behind. I'm sorry, David, I said, my voice steady. I can't help you, not this time. You need to learn what it means to stand on your own. He hung up without another word, and I knew it was the end, not just of the conflict, but of the relationship I'd spent a lifetime trying to protect. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The farmhouse was quiet, the air filled with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. I thought about everything I'd lost, my trust, my illusions, my son, and everything I'd gained. Self-respect, boundaries, a community that stood by me when it mattered most. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but it was tempered by a fierce pride. I'd survived. I'd fought back. And I'd won. As darkness fell, I raised a glass to the memory of my wife, to the family I'd loved and lost, and to the man I'd become. Betrayal had nearly broken me, but in the end it had set me free. The days that followed were quiet, than any I could remember. The farmhouse, once echoing with the chaos of betrayal, now settled into a peaceful rhythm. I woke each morning to the sound of birds in the orchard, the sun rising over fields that were mine again, fields I'd nearly lost to greed and manipulation. There was a strange comfort in the solitude, a sense of healing that came not from forgetting the past, but from facing it head-on. Neighbors continued to stop by, some with casseroles, others with offers to help repair what Jessica's family had destroyed. Each gesture reminded me that, even when blood turns cold, community can still run warm. I found myself opening up in ways I never had before, sharing my story with others who'd suffered similar wounds. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a secret shame. It was a scar I wore openly, proof that I'd survived. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, Ms. Carter called. "It's over, Tom," she said, her voice gentle. "Jessica's family has dropped the appeal. They're leaving the state. You're free." The words washed over me like rain after a long drought. Free. I let the word settle in my mind, feeling its weight and its promise. For the first time in months, I slept through the night, untroubled by nightmares or regrets. But freedom came with its own kind of loneliness. The silence in the house was different now, no longer the emptiness of loss, but the quiet of a new beginning. I spent my days tending the fields, repairing fences, planting new seeds. Each task was a small act of reclamation, a way of reminding myself that this land, this life, still belonged to me. One Saturday, as I was mending the garden gate, a car pulled up the drive. It was David. He stepped out slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes downcast. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt wider than ever. Finally, he looked up. His voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry. I lost everything. Jessica's gone. The kids are with her parents. I don't know what to do." I studied him, searching for the son I'd raised. He looked older, thinner, the weight of his choices etched deep into his face. "You made your bed, David," I said quietly. "Now you have to lie in it." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know, I wanted you to know I regret it. All of it." For a moment I considered inviting him in, offering him the forgiveness he so desperately sought. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the months of exile. Some wounds take longer to heal. "I hope you find your way," I said, my voice steady, "but I can't fix this for you. Not anymore." He nodded again, turned, and walked back to his car. As he drove away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I'd always believed that family meant unconditional support, that love required endless sacrifice. But now I understood. Real love has boundaries. Real love demands respect. That night I sat on the porch, the farmhouse glowing softly behind me. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the trust I'd given, the betrayal I'd endured, the justice I'd fought for. I realized that in losing so much, I'd found something even more valuable, my own self-worth. I was no longer a victim, no longer a man defined by what others took from him. I was the author of my own story, the guardian of my own peace. As the stars appeared overhead, I raised my cup in a silent toast to my wife whose memory had given me strength, to my neighbors whose kindness had restored my faith, and even to David, whose mistakes had taught me the hardest lessons of all. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the ache of loss threatened to overwhelm me. But I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. In the weeks that followed, I found new purpose in the land. I started a small community garden, inviting neighbors and their children to plant and harvest alongside me. The laughter of kids running through the fields brought back memories of happier times, but also created new ones, moments of hope, of connection, of healing. The farmhouse, once a symbol of pain, became a place of gathering, of growth, of second chances. Looking back, I realized that betrayal had not destroyed me. It had revealed the truth about the people I loved and about myself. It had forced me to draw lines, to demand respect, to reclaim my dignity. In the end, justice was not just about getting my house back. It was about finding the courage to stand up for myself, to say enough, and to build a life on my own terms. If you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted most, know this: you are not alone. There is life after loss, strength after heartbreak, and hope after even the deepest wounds. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to walk away from those who refuse to honor your worth. Sometimes I walk the fields at dusk, the sky painted in streaks of gold and violet, and I think about everything that's happened. I remember the shock of betrayal, the sting of being cast out of my own home, the humiliation of watching strangers claim what I'd built with my bare hands. I remember the sleepless nights in that motel, the endless questions: how could my own family do this? Was I too trusting, too generous, too blind to the warning signs? The pain was real, and for a long time it threatened to swallow me whole. But as the seasons changed, so did I. I learned that boundaries are not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. I learned that justice sometimes comes slowly, and that standing up for yourself can feel lonely, but it's the only way to reclaim your life. I learned that forgiveness is not forgetting, and that sometimes the people you love most are the ones you must let go. If you're listeners to this and you've been through something similar, if you've been used, betrayed, or made to feel small by those you trusted, know that you are not alone. I studied him, searching for the son I'd raised. He looked older, thinner, the weight of his choices etched deep into his face. "You made your bed, David," I said quietly. "Now you have to lie in it." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know, I wanted you to know I regret it. All of it." For a moment I considered inviting him in, offering him the forgiveness he so desperately sought. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the months of exile. Some wounds take longer to heal. "I hope you find your way," I said, my voice steady, "but I can't fix this for you. Not anymore." He nodded again, turned, and walked back to his car. As he drove away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I'd always believed that family meant unconditional support, that love required endless sacrifice. But now I understood. Real love has boundaries. Real love demands respect. That night I sat on the porch, the farmhouse glowing softly behind me. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the trust I'd given, the betrayal I'd endured, the justice I'd fought for. I realized that in losing so much, I'd found something even more valuable, my own self-worth. I was no longer a victim, no longer a man defined by what others took from him. I was the author of my own story, the guardian of my own peace. As the stars appeared overhead, I raised my cup in a silent toast to my wife whose memory had given me strength, to my neighbors whose kindness had restored my faith, and even to David, whose mistakes had taught me the hardest lessons of all. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the ache of loss threatened to overwhelm me. But I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. In the weeks that followed, I found new purpose in the land. I started a small community garden, inviting neighbors and their children to plant and harvest alongside me. The laughter of kids running through the fields brought back memories of happier times, but also created new ones, moments of hope, of connection, of healing. The farmhouse, once a symbol of pain, became a place of gathering, of growth, of second chances. Looking back, I realized that betrayal had not destroyed me. It had revealed the truth about the people I loved and about myself. It had forced me to draw lines, to demand respect, to reclaim my dignity. In the end, justice was not just about getting my house back. It was about finding the courage to stand up for myself, to say enough, and to build a life on my own terms. If you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted most, know this: you are not alone. There is life after loss, strength after heartbreak, and hope after even the deepest wounds. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to walk away from those who refuse to honor your worth. Sometimes I walk the fields at dusk, the sky painted in streaks of gold and violet, and I think about everything that's happened. I remember the shock of betrayal, the sting of being cast out of my own home, The humiliation of watching strangers claim what I'd built with my bare hands. I remember the sleepless nights in that motel, the endless questions. How could my own family do this? Was I too trusting, too generous, too blind to the warning signs? The pain was real, and for a long time it threatened to swallow me whole. But as the seasons changed, so did I. I learned that boundaries are not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. I learned that justice sometimes comes slowly, and that standing up for yourself can feel lonely, but it's the only way to reclaim your life. I learned that forgiveness is not forgetting, and that sometimes the people you love most are the ones you must let go. If you're listeners to this and you've been through something similar, if you've been used, betrayed, or made to feel small by those you trusted, know that you are not alone. There are thousands of us out here, quietly rebuilding, quietly healing, quietly learning to say no and mean it. Your story matters, your pain is real, and your future is still yours to shape. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe David will find his way back. Maybe he won't. Maybe the scars will fade. Maybe they'll always ache a little. But I do know this. I am no longer afraid. I am no longer ashamed. I am no longer willing to trade my peace for someone else's comfort. So if you're standing at the edge of your own storm, wondering if you have the strength to fight back, let my story be your answer. You do. You can, and you must. Because in the end, the only person who can truly protect your dignity is you. Thank you for being here, for listening, for sharing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face betrayal alone, and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. To hear more stories of justice, boundaries, and second chances, click on the next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well, on your own terms.